This is an even smaller scale Burrell traction engine. John Bates is with me here. John, what scale is this to?
This is 3-inch.
Are you the builder of this then, John?
No, I got it almost complete and then completed it and put it into condition for rallying. Got it working.
Does something this size take much driving then? Obviously, I mean, there are small controls there to get your fingers into, aren't there?
Yeah, you get a few battle scars out of it, on the hands, but they're fairly easy to drive. Just a little bit of getting used to, getting a balance. They tend to move off rather quickly.
We noticed the number plate on it, but obviously something this size, you're not able to drive it on the road, are you?
No, you're not. No, that's only a dummy.
So just at shows like this. Do you find it difficult driving around the show? Like, I mean, we were on the ground last night. There are a lot of people around. Do you find it difficult being so low down?
It is very difficult, yes. Last night it was so crowded, we just parked in front of the Showman's and stayed there for about 3 hours.
And what's the heaviest weight do you think you could pull with this engine?
Well, they repute it to pull around about 2 ton, but I've never tried that, but it'll pull 3 adults with ease up about a 1 in 4 hill.
It's not bad then for such a machine so small.
No, they are very powerful. There's a lot of torque low down. I think they probably only generate about half a horsepower, but it's very low geared, so it's quite effective.
Half-size and miniature engines are running all the way around the site, but the models are kept in one marquee. That's our next port of call, to have a look at some of the creations in the model tent. This is James Dobbs here. He's responsible for the 2 boats that we see here. James, these obviously took quite some time to put together like that.
Well, a good year for each one, a good year.
And what was the most difficult part on it? Was it all the rigging and that kind of thing?
The rigging would be the hardest part, yes. Hours and hours of rigging, hours and hours with the sails.
And how do you actually put the knots together on the rigging? Do you do it with needles or anything like that?
Pair of tweezers, sit there with a couple of tweezers, night after night.
It must affect the eyesight a little, looking at such fine detail.
It probably will by the time I'm an old man, but I should carry on building them.
This is James's father, Alex Dobbs. Alex doesn't actually model mainly in wood. He models in metal and wood. What have we got models of down there, Alex?
A 2-inch scale, Clayton and Shuttleworth lorry, steam lorry, a Stewart beam engine, and a boiler. That was made of castings, and the boiler was scrap, made out of scraps.
And there's a model there also of Rocket, I see.
Yes, that's bought. I just put it on show because it's rather a rarity.
It's a rarity. How come it's rare? Could you tell us a little bit about its history then?
Well, I don't know much about its history. I haven't had it long, but I've been told it's quite rare, so I thought I'd show it. And there's 1 or 2 people that have come by and they've got one as well. So perhaps it's not so rare as I thought it was.
Is anything on here a working model, and do all the moving parts actually move on them?
Oh yes, they're all working models, yeah. They've all been tested on compressed air, but since I've only just finished the lorry, I haven't steamed it as yet because it mucks it up. As soon as you light it up, it's sooty, and as I say, I just finished it for the show.
You don't really want to be setting it going in a tent like this then?
Not really, no.
This is Peter Howard with 1 or 2 of the models he's made. We'll start off with the traction engine here. What's it made out of that, Peter?
That's an all metal engine. The plans and parts are all bought from Reeves at Birmingham, the well-known model people. And I sold my business and had a bit of spare time, so decided to build a traction engine, which I'd wanted all my life. I'm not an engineer, but with a little help from others, there's the end product.
It's a true scale model then, that is it?
That's 1.5 inches to the foot, all chin.
And I assume you've done the majority, if not all the work on that. Did you have to cut all the gears and that kind of thing yourself?
No, the gears I bought from Reeves. That's one thing that the help that I can get can't do, because I don't know any engineers. They're all like myself. Well, we do it just as a pastime.
It's a blessing in disguise then that you can buy those little parts to put on it.
It is. Of course, the real engineer would have made those, but I'm not an engineer.
We move over to the show organ now, Peter. That obviously is not all made out of metal. That's metal and wood and probably one or two other materials as well, isn't it?
Yes, it's mainly wood, and I can say I made, well, the biggest majority of that again. The three figures I didn't cut because I tried and made such a mess that I went to a professional man. A lot of people in our world would know him. Woody White. He lives at Weston-super-Mare, and he cuts figures for the big organs, and he obligingly cut me those.
So you couldn't get more closer really to the genuine article than that, really?
No, I don't think you could.
Are organs this size playable at all?
Unfortunately not. In a big organ there are a lot of pipes. I'm not going to say small pipes, but of course there would have to be small pipes to come into scale, and since you'd need about, well, anywhere between 150 and 200, you couldn't of course scale a keyframe down to take all those pipes. I have built a keyframe in it, and I've got the music books going through, but of course they're only to look at.
Of course, the showman that would play the organ would probably go around in a showman's living wagon. You've also got a model of one of those, and it's fascinating the amount of detail you've got in there.
Yes, that's my latest project. I've been on it a couple of years, and hopefully I might finish it this winter, but the winters seem to go. I come out to these rallies, well, from May until October, and I've got to do some work at home. My wife chases me.
And so, following our journey around the world of models, it's back outdoors and back to full size. This is once again live steam as we look at some of the rollers on display at the Great Dorset Steam Fair. This Burrell Steam Road Roller is father and son owned. It comes from Romsey in Hampshire. This is Nigel Isaacs, the owner of it. Nigel, suppose you could tell us a few things about the engine.
Well, basically, it weighs nearly 15 tons, and it used to put in the very big, heavy hogging in the road for the tarmac. So before the tarmac was put down, you'd get the heavy hogging put in by this particular engine, you see. If you look to the rear of the engine here, there's a scarifier which lifts the road up to put in the heavy base for the roads. It was new to our Dingland Sons of Climsland in Cornwall, where she subsequently burnt a cottage down there. The sawmills had to be sold to pay for the damage, and from then onwards they carried on working her, and she also tipped over down there in a quarry as well, which bent the crankshaft on one side, so when she ticks over you'll see a slight quiver on the flywheel. But yeah, she's a lovely old gal to go.
So when the roads were actually being made, this would have been one of the first rollers onto the site?
That's right, yes. It would be one of the first ones, mainly because of its size and its weight. It wouldn't be any good at all for finishing the road, simply because the rollers are too narrow. You need a roller with a lot wider rear roller on it to give a better finish for the tarmac to go down.
Obviously in the early days when these rollers were working the roads, they weren't the same as the motorways of today. In what way did they differ?
Well, in actual fact, they differ now because although there's heavier traffic with the larger lorries, which are of course heavier weights, they haven't got the build and the quality of what they had years ago.
I can't really imagine the days when these would be working, but how big a team and how much machinery would be involved in actually building a road?
Well, there'll be 2 or 3 rollers on site. There'll also be a water cart which had to be brought back and forwards to the crew. Of course, you had to have water and you've got to have your coal brought on site. But in actual fact, there'll be about 10, 11 men on site with those 3 engines. Of course, of putting the hogging in by hand. No tractors then, all done by hand.
And of course the majority of the work would be done by steam?
Of course, all done by steam, and horse and cart, of course.
And how was all the material transported to the site?
By steam wagon. The steam wagons used to bring it down by very big loads indeed, dump it off on site, and then they would manually spread it and dig it into the road to have it rolled.
Okay then, we've got John Glaze here now with another steamroller. It's a Marshall's steamroller built at Gainsborough in England. Its name's Jane and it looks rather in pristine condition, this. I understand it's reasonably new around the showgrounds.
That is correct. It's her first season out. She finished from a major overhaul in February this year after a 5-year restoration. She's owned by Len Crane in Wolverhampton. He bought it on behalf of his wife for a birthday present, and obviously she's named after his wife, Jane. She was built in 1925 by Marshalls. She's a 10-ton piston valve single steam road roller. She was first used by Market Harborough County Council in Leicestershire, where she's used the majority of her life. She was sold into preservation in the late 1960s, and Len acquired her about 1975 as a kit of parts. And Len had to start from scratch, sorting the parts out and finding out what was good to use, what was rotten, and starting again from scratch. And she was finished February this year.
So it's taken a total of 15 years to get to this condition then?
Yeah, but Len in the meantime has probably worked on several other projects, so it doesn't mean 15 years full time. If you total the time up, it'd probably be about 5 years, which has been the last 5 years.
Generally speaking, when one gets hold of a locomotive, I mean, where do you start really putting it into condition again? Yeah,
well, your priority with a steam road roller or a traction engine or a road locomotive is the boiler and firebox. That is your chassis. So your first thing you have to do there is to get a boiler inspector in. That's where I'm usually called in, to see whether the boiler and firebox is reusable again. And if it isn't, you've got quite an expensive exercise on your hands.
So we do understand that you're a boiler inspector, and what kind of things do you look for when you're inspecting a boiler?
Mainly to see if there's any major fatigue in the steel plate work, either on the boiler barrel or firebox internal external plate work. And if everything's sound, you carry out a hydraulic test, which is 1.5 times the working pressure cold, and you give it a good hammering for shock, see if there's any leaks appear after the shock. If everything's okay then, then you can give the owner the OK to carry on rebuilding the engine, and then at the end we carry out a live test, which we call a steaming examination, where we have the engine blowing off as she is now at full working pressure at 150 psi, see if there's any major steam leaks.
Of course, the boiler is the major safety aspect, one would have thought, on these engines, so you do have to be strict, don't you?
Very strict. You have to abide the code of practice of the Health and Safety Executive, which superseded the Board of Trade. So you have to go through the formalities of the necessary paperwork. That has to be assessed by an approved insurance company who take out the insurance on the engine.
When a boiler's been inspected and passed OK, how long can one expect it to work?
There's an annual inspection, a cold and a steam examination, which takes out every year, and that has to be taken place, that is compulsory. And then I operate a hydraulic examination of every 7 years.
So, with the conclusion of the roller section, we've now covered roughly half of this year's show. And at this point we're now going to concentrate on the internal combustion engine, and first of all we take a look at motorcycles. This is Frederick Clark, who's travelled down from Wolverhampton this week for the show, especially with his Ariel Square 4 here. Ariels, of course, were a company that suffered with the intrusion into the market by the Japanese, weren't they?
Yes, that's correct.
And they're not in existence now?
No, none whatever.
And what period of time does this particular motorcycle come from then?
This was manufactured in 1953.
And how long have you had it?
I bought it in 1979 as a total wreck.
So obviously you must have one or two stories about the way you went on when you were having to build it up to what condition it's in now.
It's being as it was in a bit of a wreck, it was a bit difficult to get the necessary parts and so forth. I was travelling all over the country to get them, and now I've got it 100% complete, including the colour, which is blue. Now the colour of blue, there were only 60 machines of these made in 1953, and out of the 60 machines, 40 went to the Australian police, 10 to the New Zealand police, and there are 10 left in this country. At the present day, we are informed that there's still only 3 of us left with this colour as the manufacturers made it. Now one of those 3 is not far away at Ringwood, which has got a special sidecar on that was made especially for this machine, and it is all done up and painted in exactly the same colour as mine, of which you can see here.
Is this colour then because it would belong to a police force somewhere?
Oh, no, this is the original colour, this is the proper colour, and on the chart in the tent here I've got the official card out of the booklet of the aerial manufacturers to say that this machine was produced in Wedgwood blue and claret, and the customer had the choice of the 2 colours.
What was the size of the machine what's the size of the engine that's in this bike then?
The engine of this machine is the Mark II 4 cylinders with a 1000cc engine.
That's quite some engine, no doubt. It kicks out some power.
Yes, the engine is equivalent to the Mini engine of the 1000cc series of the Mini.
Now, have you been with bikes since your youth?
I've been with bikes now. I was riding bikes at the age of 9 years in 1928. I'm now at the age of coming 771.
So you really know bikes inside out?
A bit, that is so.
Sunbeam is yet another name that has disappeared from the market as far as motorcycles are concerned since the Japanese came into the market. I've got David with me here to tell me 1 or 2 things about this. It's called Sunbeam. Is it anything to do with the car concern?
It was to do with the car concern, but they split up many years ago, I think in the 20s, I'm not quite sure. So, certainly before this was made.
And how successful were they in the bike manufacturing world?
Well, they're very successful, especially in the 20s. A lot of the purists considered the quality, as with lots of other things, seemed to go off towards the end of the 30s. This bike was made in 36, which is getting towards the end of Sunbeam's manufacture in Wolverhampton. And by that time they've been taken over by, or just after were taken over by Associated Motorcycles, and they finished in Wolverhampton in 1937.
This is quite a smart looking bike. Would this be considered something like the top of its range in its day?
No, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm afraid it wouldn't. It's one of the more lowly models. The 250s and 350s were the more lowly sort of ride-to-work machines. And the best Sunbeams were usually considered to be the 500s and even 600s.
Did Sunbeam ever race their machines then?
Yes, they did a lot of racing earlier than this. They did a lot of racing early in the 20s and before the 20s, and they were very successful.
Brian Kemish here has a motorcycle that I understand is quite unique and a little bit on the rare side. That's true, isn't it, Brian?
Yeah. BSA's built these for the 500-mile and the 12-hour endurance races during the Sport and Motorcycles series in 1962 and 63s.
So these were actually racing bikes?
This was built by BSA's. That was their contribution towards the 12-hour and the 500-mile racing, yes.
And how many were built?
There was 1,160 built. There was 1,120 went to America, and there was a further 42 was made, and the assembly line was broken at BSA's, and there was an extra £108 was charged extra on top of list price for these machines. Yeah.
Are there that many in existence these days then?
Well, there's only 61 registered with the BSA Owners Club of Great Britain.
Now the name BSA, I'm sure there are quite a few people out there who wonder what the letters BSA stand for.
British Small Arms, Birmingham.
And did they ever manufacture guns and ammunition and that kind of thing?
Yes, they did. Yeah, rifles and all. Yes.
What made them switch to motorcycle manufacturing then?
I just don't know. You got me guessing now. There was the biggest manufacturer of motorcycles in the country. The different range of bikes when they were in existence at Small Heath. Yes. Right from the 125s right up to this one was a glamour bike, the Rocket Goldie. Yeah.
We see the gauges in front of you there. Could you take me through what all the gauges there are for?
Well, it's a rev counter there, so you can read your speed, your revs up through each respective gear, because you've got a racing gearbox, and she peaks at 7,400 revs, and then you get near enough up and you switch to the next gear. On you go.
So you more or less, if you're up on the race, and you would actually be changing with the rev counter?
Oh, without a doubt, yes. Without a doubt, yes. Yeah. Yeah, she peaks at 7.4, this one do. Yeah. Yeah.
Speed-wise, what can you get out of this then?
Well, I got the performance card with this bike. She'd do 84 in first, 96 in second, 114 in third, and 125 in top. Now, the ex-Norton Works rider, Sid Lawton, said a good one would do 130, 132. Yeah.
How much have you had out of it?
118, about 3 parts throttle, between Banbury and Oxford. Yeah.
Moving on from motorcycles and looking for a little more comfort in the world of family transport, we take a look now at some cars. This here is Lindsay Gates, sat in his pride and joy. Why exactly is this vehicle?
This is a Wolseley Hornet 1931, 6-cylinder overhead cam. It was found completely scrapped. I just stepped into the chassis and rebuilt it as you see it now.
It's quite comfortable actually in here, but it's very, very compact, isn't it?
Oh, very small. Well, these were built, Wolseley's only ever made an engine, and these were built on a 1928 Morris Minor chassis. And then Eustace Watson's designed the outside. Abbey Bodyworks in London completed the bodywork on the outside. Many different things on it really. The steering column has got a 6-inch piece underneath the steering wheel. The chassis has got a bolt-on section from an early Morris Minor. And well, as you see it, so it is. What else?
So it's lots of bits and bobs from other things really.
Well, it was Wolseley's, I say, never ever made a car as such. They just made an engine, and they bought all Morris Minor gear from the Morris Minor Works, and this is what you see.
And it's an old bonnet-mounted temperature gauge down there. Is it very easy to see that when you're actually driving along?
Yeah, when you got rid of all this dust, there's no problem. It actually reads very correct, actually, because when it's in the red, it's boiling. These engines have no cooling fan, and if you don't move, you don't cool.
Okay then, in the days when this was on the road, one would imagine that motoring wasn't quite the luxury that it is these days.
No, these were very direct steering cars. The steering box is very close to the kingpins, and as soon as you hit a bump, it jumps about 3 feet. Now, these were always advertised to do about 85 miles an hour. But I don't want to be anywhere near in it or around it when it's doing that, believe you me, especially on today's roads. And I want a fortnight's notice to stop it, because the brakes are just little inch bands. They were all right in 1931 when there's only horses about, but not in today's modern traffic.
We see the little man on the front there. That obviously wasn't standard fitment to this vehicle.
That's a mannequin Piz from Brussels, and it was always bet that I couldn't make it work, and as you see I have done, and that's why it's left on there.
Roger Nunn, along with his brother, helped restore this 1923 Morris Cowley. I do understand though, Roger, it's not in actual manufacturer's original condition, is it?
No, the vehicle was built in 1923 as a 4-seat tourer. We believe it was modified as an estate car in 1927 to transport people from railway station to a hotel in Bury St Edmunds.
Would it have taken much work to convert it?
Not as I understand it. There was a firm in Manchester which advertised that they could change a bullnose Morris body in 3 minutes. I don't believe it myself, but I still have the original advert.
And what was in the worst condition on the vehicle? Would it have been the wooden section of it?
The wooden section at the rear was very bad. The shed that it had been stored in had collapsed on top of the vehicle. Everything was wringing wet and had rotted away.
So it proved to be quite a job to get it to the condition we see it in today.
It's taken 3.5 years so far, and we've not finished yet. We only got it on the road on the 7th of August. That was its first time on the road since 1937, believe it or not. We believe it was laid up just prior to the war.
So are we to say this is the first show it's been to then?
This is it. Well, this is its first major show. We took it to one little village show, and unfortunately it broke down.
I have with me here John Wilton. John, this is a car that I've not seen a lot about. What is it?
It's a 1914 Stellite. The car was designed by Wolseley's for Vickers and built by another one of the Vickers companies called the Electric and Ordnance Accessories Company in Birmingham.
Were there many built then?
The production run for the 4 or 5 year period they made them was approximately 1,500 cars, so quite a few were made in fact.
Would this have been considered a sports car in its day then?
No, it wouldn't. No, it was actually made as a cycle car or a light car, and it was made under the internationally agreed formula where the chassis weight was under 6.5 hundredweights and the engine capacity was under 1100 cc's, hence the car is 1075 cc's, just to fall inside that category.
Yeah, and we notice the seating arrangement on the back of the vehicle as well.
The dicky seat, yes, it was basically a 2-seater with the dicky. They also made a 3-seater version, which I think was designed more with the chauffeur in mind, so he sat in the front and the 2 seats were at the back, and they even made a little light panel van on the same wooden chassis.
And what sort of family would own something like this? Would they have to be well-to-do, or...?
I'm sure they were, and I think in a lot of cases it was aimed at perhaps the estate runabout or perhaps the army officers getting back to barracks car, if you like.
Did they do a fair turn of speed then?
But it's rated maximum RPM of 1500, and at that it's supposed to achieve 27 miles an hour.
Only 27 miles an hour?
Yes, although there are some reports of the period where they tuned one and raced it around Brooklands and achieved a speed of 62 miles an hour.
It's true to say that most vehicles, although they're in pristine condition today, start off as, well, wrecks really. This is a vehicle that's not been started to be renovated as yet. Peter Giles has brought it along. Peter, what is it and where did you discover this?
This is a 1932 Renault, and I found this in the middle of France, in a barn. with maybe 6 or 8 others of the same condition.
And did you bring just this one back, or have you brought the others back as well?
No, I brought them all.
That must have been quite a task.
It was quite difficult getting actual transport to get it into the country. Other than that, no problem, really.
Is there anything customs-wise when you bring a vehicle in like this?
Yes, you have a lot of problems with the customs because of drugs and all the VAT and everything else, so you pay your dues and away you go.
Now, obviously this vehicle's in quite a state. Have you any idea when it last ran?
I would say maybe 40 years ago.
And where would one start in renovating something like this?
Well, I suppose you start with the mechanics, do the body, then the interior, chrome, bits and pieces.
Basically take it down bit by bit and then assemble it bit by bit again.
That's correct, yeah. Don't get too involved, don't take too much off at the same time.
And how long would you reckon it to take to do this?
If I was doing it myself, 2 years maybe, 2.5 years.
Now, I understand that you're not going to be tattling this yourself. You've actually sold it at the show here. Is that a relief to you?
In one way, yes, because it means I can go and buy some more. In another way, no.
Have you ever tattled any renovation projects yourself?
Yes, I do it as a sort of a living, part-time hobby. Got quite a collection of cars myself.
And do you enjoy the task?
Yeah, great.
Well, it's a lovely warm afternoon here at the show, and we've managed to drag Sam away from a little sunbathing. Sam, I understand this is your ERF here.
1959 ERF. It was lying in a scrapyard for 7 years, and we retrieved it, just chassis cab. The wife and myself completely rebuilt it in our spare time over 18 months. We've done a lot of rallying with it now. We've done the London to Brighton run twice. We have just returned now from the Isle of Wight, and Sunday tomorrow we're doing the run from Bournemouth to Bath to take us home again, and we have much pleasure out of it. We've got our own living accommodation on the back, and now I've retired, I think I'll be using it quite a lot more.
You say the wife helped you to restore this vehicle?
Yep. Yeah, the wife helped me. She reupholstered all the seats and all the inside of the cab and painted the inside of the cab as well, plus some of the other cab work.
And of course the engine that powers it is the legendary, dare we say, Gardner engine.
It's a Gardner 4LW engine, and I overhauled the engine myself. Being a fitter over the days, so I could do the job and work on these particular engines 30 years ago.
The Gardner engine was considered quite highly in the commercial world, wasn't it?
Yes, it was very early, back well in the 1920s.
But of course it wasn't an engine that was built, shall we say, for road speed. It was more of a plodder, and it really did do the job though, didn't it?
Oh yes, it did the job well for what it was made for, but not for the modern vehicle speeds.
What was this vehicle actually doing in service then?
It was used, when it was new, it was used for hauling hay with a draw and a drawbar trailer until the showman purchased it. Then the showman purchased it, fitted a box van onto it, and was towing a trailer as well for showman's use. Until such times he disposed of it to someone, and they just left it lying to rot away.
And then you came along and saved it?
Came along and saved it, yeah.
This is a Douglas make of commercial vehicle. It's not a name in commercial vehicles that I'm familiar with. So Phil here, Phil Evans, is going to tell me a little about it, I hope. Is it the same as the motorcycle manufacturers?
No, it's a firm from Cheltenham in Gloucester that actually build specialised four-wheel drive vehicles, timber vehicles, timber haulage. They built snow ploughs, anything really that was out of the ordinary. This particular vehicle, there was two made for the British Transport Commission, which in fact was British Rail, and I was told that they worked as a pair. I can't prove that one way or the other, but it's an unusual vehicle in as much as it's four-wheel steer as well as four-wheel drive, and it's got a Commer TS3 engine, which is a two-stroke supercharged diesel, which is quite a rare engine nowadays anyway. Not many have survived, I wouldn't think.
They didn't do mass production at all then?
No. Specialised vehicles, I would think possibly numbers in half a dozen or so different vehicles, but I think they built quite a few sort of one-off vehicles. I think their main product now is the Tugmasters that they use in airports for moving the aircraft about. That's their main sort of product now.
So as a company then, they're actually still in existence?
Oh yes, they are, yes. Oh yes, still in existence, yeah.
How long have they been building commercial vehicles then?
I would think since just after the Second World War, because they apparently started by converting ex-military vehicles, four-wheel drive, mainly AEC Matadors, and they used to shorten the wheelbase and put their own winching equipment in for timber contractors. So I would think just after the war they would have started, I would think.
So it was more or less a business that they fell into by accident then?
I rather think that the Douglas himself would more than likely have been in timber haulage. I think that's how it would have started many years ago.
And where did you pick this particular vehicle up then, Phil?
It was in a sawmill near Henley-on-Thames, and it had been stood in there for quite a number of years, more or less derelict, to be quite honest. I mean, the bottom of the cab, this is all new from there down, you know, all had to be rebuilt, and quite a lot of work on the mechanics. But I don't think it honestly did a great deal of work in the timber line, because the biggest problem with it doesn't steer very well on the road. It tends to have a mind of its own. In fact, it wanders about all over the place, so we do in fact low load it if there's any distance to be travelled, you know.
This is the husband and wife team of Robert and Jenny with their Bedford truck. It's quite an early Bedford this, isn't it, Robert?
Yes, 1941. It's a Bedford. Lots of words. Yeah, it was a tipper, but it's been put on as with a mobile crane on the back. It's not a lot to say about it. That it actually was a bit rough when I had it, but now it's running, and I can bring it to Stirpane, which I'm pleased to say. I've had to have it re-sprayed and many other parts to put it right. It's taken right 2 years to really get it any good, but it's worth it at the end just to come to Stirpane.
This is your first year here then, is it?
Well, no, it's the second year with this one, but the first year was not that very clever. It was a bit rough, but now it is looking tighter in it each year, and hopefully it look better as the next year come on.
Has he done most of the work on this himself then, Jenny?
Well, yes, apart from the respraying, I mean, when we first came to Stourpane, we came with vintage cars, and we've kind of progressed since then. And he brought this sort of heap home and stuck it in my drive, much to the amazement of myself and all the neighbours. It's a great talking point with all the tradesmen that call. And it's been in various bits in the garden for a couple of years. But the majority of the work, apart from the spraying of the vehicle, Robert's done himself.
Did you actually get any warning before he brought it home with him then?
Well, he kept threatening for a long time, and I didn't think he'd actually go and do it. And one day he disappeared up the scrapyard, and the next thing I knew, it was coming through the gates, and I thought, oh, good grief, he's really done it this time. And it's caused a lot of comment, but it's all been quite favourable, so it's okay.
Do you manage to get the wife to pull in on any of the jobs on the vehicle then?
Oh yeah, a few jobs. Yeah, especially when it's going wrong. You know, I usually want to cuss at somebody. She's always there around to do it. I hope you like that one.
I'm the chief go-getter of spares and haggler of pieces at scrapyards, and I get sent back if the bits are wrong and all that sort of thing. So I guess I do my fair bit, I think.
Further down the size scale from these large timbers, we can witness wood being chopped into sticks in the stationary engine section. We have here a machine with quite a sharp-looking blade. It's owned by Vic Todman here. Vic, what exactly do you do with this machine?
Well, what it's made for is to chop in logs into lighting wood for the fires, but these days they don't use any fire, so we do it for just demonstration purposes, really. But people keep, very interested in it, and it's all good fun.
It is, of course, a machine from the past. How old is it, this kind of thing?
That we can't find out. I've written up into 2 magazines for information, to yet nothing's come to light. But we know they're made in Bradford, but just nothing comes to light on it so far. One day I'm hoping something will come up.
You've also got a bundling machine there with it. Did that actually come with the cutter?
Yes, that did, yes. That was actually done, and you bundled the sticks up and put it into the machine and squeezed up the handle, tied your string down, and then when you release the handle, that tightens your string, so your bundle is nice and light.
We're driven here actually with a small, is that a diesel or a petrol engine?
No, that's a little petrol 1.5, and that is a petrol version instead of the normally aspirated petrol paraffin ones, and it's 1928. And that was located in a builder's yard in Sussex in 1969, price 10 shillings, can you believe that?
Quite cheap, but I suppose in those days it'd probably been expensive, really. We see you driving it with this engine. Is this the way the whole rig would have worked originally?
Well, possibly could have done, or possibly could have done, had a vertical about him on shaft-driven machinery, but it could also be driven as it is today.
This is Thomas Walter, the owner of this Ruston Hornsby engine here. Thomas, what did engines like this, what were they built to do?
Well, they were mainly used on farms for cutting up roots and pumping water and operating milking machines and anything that was needed on a farm that well, manual labour couldn't do.
They were all farm engines then, they weren't built for in the factory or anything like that?
Well, basically they were used on farms, yes. Some factories had them for, well, pumping water and things like that, but basically they were used on farms, yes.
Now I understand the ignition system on this particular engine is rather unusual.
Yeah, well, this has got a Wyco EK box mag on it, and it's tripped up and down as opposed to the normal 8 PBs, which that is. It's the normal ones are driven by a shaft from the main shaft, but this one's tripped up and down from the front.
That makes it very rare then, does it?
It's reasonably rare, yes.
With it being such a rare magneto, how has it posed any problems to you getting it running?
Well, it did first of all because the coils kept breaking down and I had to have it rewound. It's been rewound and remagnetised, and it's literally a new mag now.
And there are people around to do that kind of thing in the 1990s then?
Yes, there are people. Very good people too.
What are we actually doing with this this machine then today?
Well, this one's driving a power hacksaw, Britannia Colchester hacksaw made by Britannia Colchester, about 1914.
Were they that fast and accurate with the sewing process then, these machines?
This machine, though it's old, is still pretty accurate at this moment. They could be faster than what they are at the moment, but the blade's been in there quite some time. But the weights move back now. If I put the weight forward, they'll cut faster because the weight's increased on the blade.
Looking back to the engine there, is that Crocodile a standard Ruston Hornsby fitment?
That is a patent, so most people have ducks, so I thought it'd be different, have a crocodile. It'd be cooked on Sunday.
These are a couple of Blackstone oil engines we've got with us here, and this is Terry. Terry owns the larger of the two. They're pre-1920s. What were they actually built for, Terry?
Well, the larger one here is a 1913 13 horsepower engine, and it worked for Bilthwell's Forestry Commission for many years. And when they moved all the trees and cut down what they had to do, they used to stick a couple of shire horses on it and move it to the next part of the plantation, and it did that for many years.
I understand there are actually one or two unusual features on the engine.
Yes, that's correct. This particular engine has a cone clutch on it, and it also has a water pump on it, and it works in the opposite direction, as most Blackstones do, over 12 horsepower.
And the maker's plate's in a rather obscure position there, isn't it?
Yes, they were always fitted on the crank guard where it was almost impossible to see. But to keep its authenticity, we have kept it in the original place.
Now there are lots of cams and valves down the side of the engine. What do all these cams and valves do?
Well, there are 3 valves on these engines, and you have an inlet valve and you have an exhaust valve, which you have to have on any engine, but you've also got a fuel valve on the Blackstone, and that's the thing that lets the fuel in from the hot bulb into the cylinder to cause the explosion to turn the engine round.
The smaller one over there, is that virtually the same kind of engine as the large one then?
Yes, it's exactly the same, and that worked on a farm in Lockerbie up until 1960 actually,
and that was driving all sorts of farm machinery, and it was sold locally to a timber merchant who used it on a saw bench to cut trees, actually. And then finally they went out of business, and we bought the engine from them in a fearful state and restored it to its present condition.
And so finally in this video we visit the section of the Great Dorset Steam Fair that provides a lure for many people. That's the fairground, with all its hustle and bustle and activity, and of course seen there is the great majesty of the showman's engines. Princess Mary stands quite proudly in the lineup of showman's engines here. Jim Marsh is one of the chaps who's responsible for looking after this engine, and one of the things we actually notice on it is a rather low and wide canopy. Why is this, Jim?
Well, it was built a little bit lower to so you could transport it on the railways. And that canopy was like railway gauge. You take the chimney off and it would run as railway gauge on the low loaders.
Were these engines often transported on the railways then, Jim?
Well, we think it was something they were going to do, but it never really caught on. One or two did do it, but it was probably just too much hassle to do, really. It was easier to road them.
Obviously it was quite a lot more spectacular sight to see them on the road anyway.
Well, that would be true. It's, you know, hard work. I suppose they thought at the time the railways would be a bit quicker, but it probably didn't turn out so.
Where did this engine do the most of its working life then?
Mainly around the London home counties area.
And I do understand that it was one of the last engines actually to be operating.
Yeah, as far as we can tell, she was still pulling a set of Dodgem trucks around London in 1959.
So around about that time it would have been quite a novelty, I would have thought.
Yeah, most of them had gone over to the WD, ex-war stuff, you know, all the wartime vehicles they had for moving it around, they'd all got out of that by then.
Alan Fry with Princess Royal, the showman's engine here. Alan, I understand this is quite a travelled engine.
Yeah, we've been just come back yesterday from West Germany, and the weekend before that we were in Holland, and the weekend before we were in Yeovil, and the weekend before we was in Devon and the Midlands, so we get around a fair bit at the moment.
When you take it abroad, does this pose any special difficulties for you?
Not really, no. We don't need any carnage because we're not trading, so we just go through the borders and say that it's for personal property.
So you don't have to cash in at customs with one of these then?
Not as long as we stay in the EEC. We're making negotiations now to go to Switzerland, and then we have to have ATA carnage to go through France and into Switzerland, and then get cancelled when we come out of Switzerland, or else they would charge us up to about 40% import duties and VAT.
You obviously low-loaded them on the continent, but when you get on the continent, do the other governments of Europe allow you to road these if you wished?
Yeah, with no problems at all. The only restriction we got is height, which is 4 metres. And as long as we can keep the height down, we're okay.
And a little bit about the engine. How long does it belong to you?
I've owned it for about 2.5, 3 years now. This is quite a famous engine because it was one of the first ones to be restored in the early 50s and featured on many chocolate boxes and calendars and tea towels in the 50s, and then it's been restored now 3 times.
And you did it the last of those 3 times?
Yeah, this time we went round to find what we thought was faults with a lot of other engines, like the lining too heavy and the under the canopy the wrong colour, and we hope that we found all the mistakes on other engines and corrected them on this one.
So what you're trying to say is that you've tried to put this in as near as possible, you know, its original liveries and everything like that?
That's correct, yes. Some engines, you see, they've got the gold too heavy, and we find that the lighter you keep, the thinner you keep the gold, then it looks neater.
Who do you actually get to do the paintwork and the lining on it then, Alan?
Well, I do a bit of research, first of all, and then I get a local sign writer to put on to do the gold and the lining. The whole vehicle is lined out in 23 carat gold.
That's quite some expensive lining then, I should have thought.
That's right. If you look at all the engines, you'll see all the ones that are gold, that does stand out better. And the yellow paint, or if you put gold paint on, it goes black.
This is Les Birch with the Showman's Engine Banshee. I understand, Les, that steam's been in your family for quite some years now.
Well, I can go back, I was tracing back only in this last week. We had some foreign visitors, particularly from Holland, and we traced back and I show them the history from about 1865. And we're very fortunate, really, because we're old steam people, from thrashing, steam ploughing, road haulage. We never did much in the fairgrain line, but we did a lot of timber work, and as you probably are aware these days, it's difficult to find many of the old original type of people that have been in the steam world left. It's almost like back to the Dunkirk days, where there's a limited number of them and they're now fading out, which you appreciate. Myself, not disclosing my age, but I was born in the same year as the engine behind us, 1919.
Moving to the engine behind you there then, John Fowler's of Leeds are pretty well known in the world of steam. McLarens are a little lesser known. Banshee's a McLaren. Were there many McLarens manufactured?
Well, I think if you chase up the history of McLarens, McLarens have a very wonderful history of overseas export trades. I'm not going to say they actually beat Fowler's, but I think you'll find there's been McLarens in a good many of our dominions under the British Empire, where it was necessary for hard work of hauling. In particular, I think you'll find that still in South Africa there is a few McLarens around.
Would you say that McLaren's built many features, many special features into their engines?
Well, I would go as far as to say that McLaren picked the brains of Fowler's, and if you look around McLaren's and combine them against the principles of what Fowler put in, McLaren's saw the little snags of every problem like we see in the up-to-date of machinery of today, and they finalised on these because there's no doubt about it, the McLaren is British built from the word go. Everything that was made had a purpose to it. The gear change is so simple, the operation of the cylinders and the pistons and the controls were so simple. It's simplicity in itself coupled with power, and although I say it, this engine will do 20 miles an hour, quite comfortable, providing you've got sensible people on it.
Were they, and indeed are they still sort of good, efficient machines then, these?
These engines were very efficient machines. In fact, I'll go as far as to say very economical on water. And I would go as far as to say a big engine like this one of 8 horsepower, you could do somewhere in the region of about 40 miles on a tank of water. Mind you, you'll have 2 tanks, one under the belly of the boiler and the back tank, and roughly about 500 weight of coal. You're going somewhere.
We're also fortunate today to have with us John from Leeds Industrial Museum. He's a technician at the museum, and I understand you've got a rather interesting photograph there of an engine that's coming back into this, or has indeed actually come back into this country.
It's arrived back, yes. It's arrived back from the Sudan, where it was exported by J.H. McLaren's from the Midland Works in approximately 1923. It's worked continuously in the Sahara Desert region in the Sudan, making all the irrigation canals, and it's the first of the diesel-powered McLaren windlass ploughs, and the state it's been brought back in from the Sahara Desert after being buried in the sand is enormous. You can imagine the problem I've got to restore it. Naturally, I want to speak to people like this gentleman here about different problems, and of course the McLaren works, because the records, are few and far between, and the popularity of McLarens against Fowler's in days gone by, because a lot went for export, as the gentleman already said. But I've been charged with rebuilding a diesel windlass plough from 1923 that's fitted with a Benz engine, and that was made under contract to McLaren's, and this was the first try to supersede steam with diesel and using windlass ploughing, similar to the steam ploughing that's going in the far field behind us here. Naturally, I want to find out various things about these ploughing arrangements, having charged to rebuild this one I can use as a Hulk that I've got to rebuild. However, I've nearly got the engine finished at the Leeds Industrial Museum, and we're hoping to have the engine back into full operation, given it's been over 60 years abroad. So you can gather from British engineering in those days was at the forefront of technology. So if you went back to 1923 and talked about diesel engines, you were really in the forefront of technology in those days.
How soon are you hoping to get this operational then?
Well, the engine, we're hoping to bring the engine to life before Christmas, and this is the first time the engine's been run, as far as we understand, since 1956. When you think there was 5 litres of sand in the camshaft area alone, it will give you some idea of what state the engine was in. It was completely seized solid. It's taken me 3 days to get the pistons out of the engine, and they weigh 25 pounds each piston.
You've got various old original photographs with you there, John.
Yes, these are property of the Leeds Industrial Museum, and I've been granted permission to bring them to show people.